We're going to cover a lot of new ground. We're going to look at global variables. We're going to look at sending events between functional state machines, not just within the same one. And we're going to talk about the concept of managers. So let's get right to it. In my simple little scene, I've got a few objects set up. There's a GUI text object. You can see right here just outputting some text to the screen, and we're going to use this to track some player health. We've got a little health object, and it's just a simple red cross, so we can use that as our health pickup. Could just as easily be a CAG or anything you'd like it to be. And I have a platform that you probably recognize from an earlier tutorial. So we can use this to decrement our health. Now let's start off with the health manager idea. A manager is something that takes care of some of the logic for you or some of the intelligence, and it's isolated. It sits away from everything else. So if you were doing a trigger on this object, for instance, and you were going to have different things happen, enter, exit, and you're going to do all kinds of health changes, and you're going to check to see if it's a player, if it's a crate that rolls on here instead because you're doing a weight game. It would get really complex really, really fast. But if you broke this up and had a manager, like one chunk of something that just handled all the health stuff, and then you had another chunk of stuff somewhere else that handled all your physics stuff, for example, or your gameplay scoring, then each of these systems could be much easier, much more basic, and easier to make, easier to bug fix, easier to modify. That's really what the concept of a manager is, taking some of the complexity away from just having one big giant thing. I am going to create an empty game object right here in my scene, and I'm going to name it GO for game object, health manager. And an empty game object is just, there's no physical geometry, you won't see it in the game, you can't bump into it, but it's a thing that you can interact with and you can hang scripts and functional state machines off of. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Make a new FSM right here on the health manager. And let's start with some global variables. A quick discussion about global and local variables. So far, we've been using local variables. That means if I make a variable right here, and whatever we name it, and we used it to update some numbers and check some things, local means it's only available to this functional state machine. If I made another FSM over here on this health pickup, it would have no idea what the local variables were right here. It'd have no idea what's going on. And you want it to be that way because, like in our vase example, they were each doing the same thing and checking a series of numbers and states. And you don't want them to bump into each other. You want them to operate independently. So this is a good thing. But sometimes you do want them to share a number, and that's what global variables are for. Global variable is just like a regular variable, except it's available everywhere in your program. Everywhere in Unity can access this variable and make changes to it. So they're a lot more powerful, and they can also be a little more tricky. You've got to be careful that you're using them in the right way at the right time, or else you'll be updating them all over the place. So let's make a couple of global variables right now. To make a global variable, you can either click in your Playmaker window up in your top OS toolbar, or you can come right over here to the little box, the editor window with the square and the drop-down arrow, and choose global variable. And it gives you a new window. And it allows us to choose the types, just like we do with our regular variables down here. We can choose the type of a variable that we want. Sorry if some of those are going off the screen for you. There. They're all available. They're the same type, but these are global. And I'm going to make one called current player health, and I'm going to put _I behind it because I want this to be an int. Remember, an integer. And I'm going to press add. And that way I know that this is an integer because I'm also going to make current player health _s. I'm going to make a string. Okay, and a string, if you haven't used one before, holds text data. You can think of a string simply as text. So now I have two global variables, and they're going to be available all over. within our functional state machines. On our health manager, we are going to need a setup state because when we first start up the health manager, we want to set the current player health. And that will be the integer, the one we just created. And we're going to do that with a set int value action. Set int value asks for an int variable. And when we look in our pop-up menu, we have current player health underscore I. That means this is the integer, and it says global behind it. And that lets us know, because if we had, let me just make one to show you the difference. If I had one here and I called it Bob, and we look at the list, it's not going to let us choose that because it's not an int, first of all. Let me change that right there. Now I can explain what I'm doing. So right there, we could choose Bob, which does not say anything behind it, which means it's local. Or we could choose current player health, which means, and it's global, which means available everywhere. I am going to choose that one. And before we do anything ridiculous later, I'm going to delete Bob. And we are setting the current health, let's say 50. So we start up, that value will be equal to 50. Instead, by default, it's 0 on any new int that you create. So this makes it 50. The player won't be dead right when they start the game. And I think most of your players are going to appreciate that. We also need to update this GUI text, okay? Because what we want to do is show the current player health in this GUI text right here in this HUD item. And we can't show an int because this is text. It needs a string, and this is an int. So we can do a quick little switcheroo. So if we look for convert, and here's a whole bunch of conversions you can get. In our case, we want int to string. And if we scroll down a little bit here, current player health, I. And what's the string? We want it to be the current player health, S. Okay. What that's going to do is take the int that we've told it right here, and it's going to convert that into a string value. It leaves this alone, okay? It doesn't change this. It just copies it out and changes its value into string format and stores it in this variable here, which is also global. And finally, we can update that with GUI text. Scroll down. There we go, set GUI text. So there's the bottom of our stack. Set the value of the int. We convert it to a string right away. And then we need to set the object we're going to work with. That's this GUI text right there. Okay, that's what we're going to set the value on. And the text, we could write something in, any value we wanted there. But instead, we want to use this variable, and it is the current player health underscore S global, which we just set right there. And we don't need to do them every frame, just once, because we're not updating the health a lot. It happens very rarely. So let's hit play and just see. And there we go. We've got a 50 right there. So it did indeed work. Wonderful. Now, when that's done, we'll flow out through a finished state, and we will have a listener state, because we're going to hang out up here and wait for signals. And we're the health manager, so we're going to wait for signals right here from the health pickup and from the damaging platform. So that should do that for now. Let's set up the health pickup, the object here. This is our simple little object, and let's make it rotate. Right here on the geometry part, I'm going to add an FSM. Going to be very simple. Call it rotate, add an action. I'm going to type in rotate, and we choose transform rotate. On the Y angle, I want it to rotate 180. And let's play and see what happens. And that looks great. Done and done. So let's make a new trigger for it. A simple cube. Once again, remove the mesh renderer, check his trigger, and I'm just going to eyeball this one. Be roughly the size of that box. That's good. And a name. Health pickup. And let's parent it to this object right now. So when we move it, the whole thing moves together. So we've added a new state to this FSM, and we could call it setup and go in and find our health manager, okay? Because this is going to be a prefab when we get done. We're going to have these health pickups all over the place. And so we can't just do the old trick where we drag the game object onto our action to tell it, hey, update the stuff on this one specifically. Because we don't know where it'll be. We don't necessarily know. And when you make something into a prefab, it's going to break that connection. So we need to have it go out when it comes to life and find that health manager and get a handle on it itself. And we could do it right here in the setup with something called find game object. And that would let us look for anything with a name. For instance, we could say go health manager and store it as a variable. And this is a pretty good way to do things because you look for it once and you store it as a variable, and then you just use that variable over and over and over, all over in here, anytime you need to get a hold of that. But since we're talking about global variables, why don't we make a global variable right now and do this in a better way? So if we go back to the health manager, right here in the setup, we could have the health manager identify itself as a global variable. Let's do that. We'll say get, oops, owner. And what we're doing here is asking the FSM to get a reference to its owner, which in this case is the game object Go Health Manager. And we can store that as a variable. So why don't we make that a global variable? And that way, any FSM can use it and they can all talk to each other really easily. Right here, let's call this Health Manager. And we don't want it to be a float, we want it to be a game object because that's what this object is. You got to make a match. And we'll add that. And now if we look in get owner, right there, health manager global, which is really cool. I am going to move it to the top though. Move action to top. So now it's way up at the top of the screen because I want this to happen first. I want to make sure it gets a hold of itself right away so that if anything else starts trying to use this variable while they're also coming awake and being created in the world, that we don't have any issues. Setting these things and updating the HUD can happen a little bit later if they need to. So now, if we look back on our health pickup, instead of doing this, we can just get rid of this altogether. And right here, we are going to do a trigger event because we're waiting for an on trigger enter. And we'll need a quick event that's called health picked up, which just means that the player ran over it and picked it up and wants to apply it. So we'll use that as our exit in our transition there. This one we will say update health, and we'll connect those together. Now this is where we're going to start doing some connections because we've come across this as the player. We're going to pick it up, and we need to do like we did in the other examples and have it clean up after itself and take care of all that mess. But also, we want to send a message. We want to tell the health manager, hey, to this listener object right here, hey, somebody has picked up a health pack and you should do what you do and figure out whether he needs health or not. Okay, figure out how to apply that and deal with all that, and I'm going to clean myself up. That's literally what's going on here. Is health pickup just says, "Hey, one more, please handle it," and then I'm going away. So, what would have to happen here? You'd want an event to fire off. And in this case, we're going to say an event called add health could happen. And let's add that as a transition out of this state, add health. And this add health is the thing we want to get access to. And so from right here, when we get picked up, we can send an event right there, send event. Okay, now this is new, so follow along with me for a minute. Event target is going to be, out of all these objects, we want a game object FSM. Okay, we're going to talk to another functional state machine on another game object. This here has an FSM, it's called FSM, and Health Manager has an FSM. It's also named FSM. We could have renamed our FSM something else if we wanted to, but that's the default name. So the game object itself, we can specify, if you remember, we made Health Manager global. Okay, it was back up here when we started in the Go Health Manager. Right away, we said get the owner, and that is the Health Manager. So it got a handle to itself there. So right here, we can use that nice and easy. We don't have to do any extra steps. We don't have to have an extra state here doing anything weird or convoluted. We can just use this and move on. It's wonderful. And the FSM name, of course, is FSM. Now, if you have more than one FSM, you could put a specific name in here. You can have more than one FSM on the same object. If you've renamed your FSM for some reason, you could just put whatever it is here. I like to leave mine named the default FSM just because when I get to spots exactly like this, I don't want to have to try to remember what the heck I named it. I just, oh yeah, FSM, and move on. So only in cases where I have a couple of FSMs on one object will I ever need to stop and think about it or look up what the name really was. This, to me, is just a speed and easy thing. And finally, send event. We don't want to use an event on this, okay? We don't want to use one of our events that we've got right here, like health picked up. We want a global event. Just like we have global variables, if you look here on the events for Go Health Manager, we chose Add Health as the event we want to fire off. And if you look here, there's this little checkbox, and this actually describes it if you hover over it. Global flag, global events can be sent between FSMs. And that's exactly what we want to do. So clicking global here makes this available to every FSM in the whole game level, just like the global variable we did. So add health underscore. If we come back to our health pickup and we choose now, add health is available right there. And we can use it to send the event when literally when we trigger this, it's going to fire off this event on another FSM, which is really, really cool. It's very powerful because now we're talking back and forth between two different things. And we don't have to put all of this complexity we're going to build here. We don't have to build it in multiple places. We can build it in this one spot. The last thing we want this to do is to clean itself up and disappear when we run over it, so it doesn't hang around after we pick it up. So let's go to our action browser again. Make sure you're on the update health. And we want to let's do a get owner again, because we want to find, well, actually we don't want that, do we? We want to get a parent, because if you look here, the health pickup, if we got the owner of the FSM, it would be health pickup. If we get the parent, it's health cross, which is the object we want to get rid of, because that in turn will get rid of everything else below it. So get parent, and then after that we're going to want a destroy object. Okay. And we need one more variable here before we start. And this is going to be a game object. And let's call this self to destroy. And what we're going to do with that is just hand it off. So we send the event, make sure that happens before we destroy ourselves, or it could stop that event. Do all that first. Then we want to get the parent of ourself. We want to store that as self to destroy. Okay. And then moving down one more in the stack, the game object we want to destroy is self to destroy. And we want that to happen right away. So that should clean this all up. Let's take a quick look at that and see if we got that working. So we enter the game, our health cross is rotating, we're in the right state, we cross it. Oh, nope, something didn't work. So let's take a look. Aha, see, this is easy. I didn't do the health picked up event in send event on the trigger event. And that's why we test. So activate that, run across it, and we have destroyed ourselves. And let's do one more check. This is pretty cool too. You can choose a different FSM than the one you're actually testing physically. And here we're looking at the Go Health Manager. Well, actually, that's not going to work. Let's really quickly add a new state and connect it. So if this gets fired off, it will flow into that and we'll know that we got it right. So I'll run forward, and it did indeed. So we know now that not only did this fire off its events, do what it needs to do locally and clean itself up, but it also made contact with the Go Health Manager, fired off this event, and moved it into that state, which is pretty darn powerful when you start thinking about what you can do with that. So what do we want this state to be doing? Well, pretty simply, list Turner. You know what? That's going to bother me until I change the name, so let me do that right now. Some of you might have already been laughing at me. Okay, what we want to do in this state, since we're adding health, is add health. So let's just call this add health. And if you remember, we've got a global variable right here that is current player health integer. And we want to increase the value of that. Currently it's 50 when the game starts. So let's go down to add, and int add is what we want to do, because we're going to take an int variable right here, current player health integer, global, and we want to add, let's say each health pickup is worth 25 points. So that should add 25 points to that current value. Then we want to move out of this back into a listener state in case the player picks up another health pack or does something else. But if you think about it, we need to update the HUD again, right? Because we did that early on. We found our self here. We set the int value to 50, which this is the equivalent, if you're a scripter or a programmer, this is the equivalent to setting the value of an int at the beginning of your script. And then we did the string conversion and updating the GUI text. But we need to do both of these steps again. So what if we added a new state? We called this update HUD. And then from setup, if we chose these two, copy selected actions, and then remove them. Move that one too. And then update HUD, we can choose paste actions. And now they're both in here. Okay, they're doing the same thing, but we're updating our HUD in our own little state. And if we flow this way, we have exactly the same setup. We did all four of these things, we just did them in two different states. But what this allows us to do is add a finished out. We can now come out of this into the update HUD. So we update the numeric value, okay, of the integer for current player health. Then we come back and run these again. We don't have to copy these and duplicate them in this state. we can simply loop back right here and reuse the same stuff over and over. And this is really cool because if we decide we need to change something later, or say you had, several, 4 or 5 different ways you could add and remove health, they could all update in one simple HUD thing. In fact, you could have another manager that just updated the HUD, but that would be a different thing. Let's stick right here because this is good enough for our purposes. And let's play this and see how we have it working now. So there's our spinning health pickup across it, and you can see we updated from 50 to 75. And the states flowed back and forth. We ended up back in the listener right where we wanted to be, so we could do it again. And if we copied this and had 2 health pickups, play again, notice our health is 50. We cross this. Well, actually, let me reselect that so you can watch the state as we do it. So our health's 50. We're in the listener state. We add health, update the HUD, and flow right back in. We're at 75. We do it again. Works again. We've got 100. So we can keep that up all day long, or until you run out of health packs. Now let's set up an area that will decrease health from our health manager. And we're going to use this platform again so we can see what it is we're doing. I'm going to create a simple cube, scale it up. Let's line these up at world center so we can work with everything a little bit easier. There you go. So I'm going to whoops, wrong one. Going to roughly scale this up to be about that size. Bring it up, that'll be fine. Get rid of the mesh renderer and turn it into a trigger and name it. Health decrease. And let's parent it right away to the platform so that everything comes along. And I'm going to move it away from now that we've put it all together at a centered world location so we know it all lines up, I'm going to move it away from the health cross so we don't bump into that and fire off 2 events at the same time. Now let's select the trigger again, add a new FSM. And we don't need to do a setup on this. So we'll make a listener date and add the trigger event. And we want an on trigger enter event. Just like when we pick up the health cross here, we're going to enter this and decrease a little bit of damage, just so we can see how both sides of that work. And we're going to need an event. Let's call it decrease health. And a new state. Name it decrease health. And we can hook them together. And let's not forget to actually choose that in the send event or nothing will work. And a little quick check. Work, but I always like to test stuff as I go. So yep, everything's good. So just like on our health pickup, we're going to send an event to the Go Health Manager. And if we look at that, we had an add health. And let's make a new one. A new event, remove health. And we'll go ahead and add that into the transition. And we know we'll need a new state. Call that remove health. And a transition finished. So oops, I put the wrong one in there, remove health. There we go. And we'll wire that to there. And just because these are top and bottom, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So what we did here was an int add to the current player health int global. And I'm going to just copy this. Copy selected actions. Oops, let me make sure I got that. Copy selected actions, remove health, and paste actions. And I want to affect the same thing, right? We added 25 up here. We want to remove 25 here as well. Let's say negative 25. Now, if I add negative 25, I'm going to end up with 25 less. So it's kind of like doing an int subtract. You can just use int add with a negative number, and that will get you there. And on finished, we'll go back to the HUD. So once again, back in our health decrease, we just need to send an event. Pick that up here. The event target will be a game object FSM. We can specify the game object being the health manager global, because remember we got that as a global variable to get a handle on it right away. We'll choose FSM as the name of it. And the event we're going to send, I forgot to make this event remove health global. So we go back really quick. We've now got remove health. Choose that right out of the list. And because it's just like, it's a thing that just sits there, we want to check again for another message. Unlike this, which goes away, when we're done with this, we're going to fire off that event and say, hey, remove 25. But then we want to go back and listen again in case the player enters it one more time. So let's try this out and see what we're doing so far. So we got 50 health, you can see in the HUD. If I enter, it decreases it to 25. And if I enter again, it decreases it to 0. So everything's working. This should give us, 25. Now we're back up to 25. So we have our little health manager handling all with just 5 states, and one of them set up. So actually just with 4 states, it's handling health pickups and health loss. Like if you this were lava or whatever, and you stepped on it and it hurt you, or you took weapon fire, you could call these. Just loops around and creates a nice little system. And you could have multiple things that added and removed health. So it wouldn't have to just be these 2. If you're using a manager, you can get access to it from all over the place, which is really, really pretty cool. You might have already noticed a problem with this or thought of one. We have a situation in which let me just play and show you. Our health pickup and health remover here, like we have 50 health. We can remove 25, we can remove 25, and then now we can remove 25, and we're into the negative 25 zone. So we can go below 0 and above 100 with our health pickup and decrease. And of course, if this were a game and you hit 0, you'd want the player to, be dead or have to restart again. And probably, if you pick 100 or 200 or whatever your number is for health, you want a maximum somewhere that the player can't get above. So let's look at how to deal with that. Because right now, it'll go and just add and add and add or remove to, infinity. So what we can do is put 2 simple checks in here, and that will take care of the problem for us. So let's add one more state here. I'm going to scroll over, add a state, and I'll call this health check. And I'll have 2 transitions out of this one, and 1 new event, and I'll call this do nothing. Okay, so in health check, I'm going to add something called int compare. And this is in logic. Actually, let me back this up and let's just look at logic really quick, the whole section. There are a ton of things. And if you've done any scripting or programming before, this really is probably where a lot of the stuff you want to be looking for is, if statements, switches, any kind of checks, they're all going to be in here. We'll use the int switch. I'm going to use the int compare, and we'll add that. And this is sort of an if-else statement. What we can do is pick one integer, in this case, current player health integer global, and we're going to compare it against 100. Okay? So what this says is, what if this current value of this variable equals 100, does it equal? Is it less than? Is it greater than? That's what it's checking against for the values. Now, if the current player health is equal to 100, equal, right? Then we're going to do nothing. We're not going to add any health at all. And let's pick do nothing as a transition. And from there, let's send it right back into the listener because we don't need to do anything in that instance. What would happen? Actually, let's rewire this too. Health check, do nothing. Okay, there we go. And less than, if the current value of the current player health is less than 100, then we want to add health. So we'll go ahead and choose add health as a transition, and let's make sure that's put in there. And if it's greater than, we also want to do nothing. So add health, in this case, will go to actually do this. So what we're going to do instead, we're in the listener, and when we do an add health thing, first, instead of going to add health, we're going to do a health check. And then if our health is less than 100, then we'll fire off the add health event, and we'll do this add of 25, okay? And when it's finished, it'll go ahead and update the HUD. And we need to update the HUD because we've updated the integer variable. Now, if the current player health is already 100, which means equal, or if it's greater than, for some unknown reason, this is just kind of a safety check, then we're not going to do anything because you're already at maximum health. And we'll go right back into the listener and wait for another event. So let's check how that would work. We start at 50, so let's add a couple more of these health gizmos. And play. So we're at 50. We pick up 1, gives us 75. Actually, let me reselect that. Meant to have that visible as we do it. Okay, so we're on the listener. Yep. Let me scroll over actually so we can see the whole thing. Now we got it. Okay. Now it's not going to let me do it, but you'll get the idea. So we pick that up. It goes to 75. We pick that one up. We go to 100. And this time, nothing, because we're already at 100. So it took the health pack. Everything worked like it should. It took the health pack, it fired off the event, it did the health check, and it just said, you know what, you've already got 100. Stop eating health packs, buddy. Not going to give you any more. And it went back to the listener. So that is how you would handle the upper end of a health manager like that. The zero part, like if you reach 0 and you want to, let's say we want to kill the player at 0 when their health reaches 0. We don't want to check in the same location. Like here, when we fired the event, we did the health check first because we need to see if you're already at 100. But we can't really be already at 100 really already at 0 because our player would already be dead. So we need to do that check after we do remove health. So let's put it in between the remove health and the HUD update. So go ahead and make my new state here. And we will call this Am I Dead? And we'll have 2 transitions out of there. And let's add another int compare. Because we want to check the same variable. We want to check current player health integer global. And we want to know if it's 0. So our default number is 0, so that's great. So if it equals 0, we want to kill the player. So let's add a new event, kill player. And we'll put that down here, kill player as an event. And let's add a new state, and we'll say end game. And I'm not going to put anything in that state. I'm just going to connect it so we have somewhere to go and see it. And this could be anything. This could be reloading the game. It could be playing an explosion effect on your, if you've got a tank or an airplane or something in your game, and then you pause and spawn in a new one. It could be that the game really ends and you show a final score. Whatever you need to do in that situation. But in this case, if the After subtracting 25, we need to go here, by the way, because once we subtract 25, we come into this check. So if it's equal to 0, then we're going to fire off the kill player event. If it's less than, again, it should never be, but I like to put this in just as a safety catch because you're going to have bugs, and once in a while, something stupid will happen and you'll end up less than. So this catches everything below that. And if it's greater than, we're going to do nothing. So let's add the do nothing event here. And we will update the HUD then. And in this case, we do have to update the HUD because we did subtract a value. We did not do that over here. If we don't do anything here, we didn't go in. Because remember, we're putting them, this one is before the health add, and this one is after the health remove. So we do need to update the HUD. So that takes care of that check. And if we play this again, we start at 50, and we can watch, go through the check, we're at 25, we go through the check, and we've moved into the end game. So that did indeed kill our player. Now, it didn't update the HUD. That would be, see, you'll notice right here, it still says 25 right there. So we didn't update the HUD because if you remember, we decided to only update the HUD after we do that. So this would be a special case. If you're going to do a long fade out, you probably need to do a separate update the HUD here. You could update the HUD and then check that. It gets a little goofy. Probably easier and less complex to do it right here and just get rid of that HUD element and do whatever you're going to do for the end game. But that is how you would handle the going above and going below problem. Now this looks a little bit like spaghetti. It's not too bad really, because if you click, you can follow the links around to where they're going. Everything turns blue to highlight for you. And this is kind of a complex FSM. They can get worse, but in general, you really want to use managers to encapsulate some of this stuff so that, I mean, can you imagine trying to put all of this complexity to check for the health in every health pack, right? Or every platform that takes away health? You know, look, this is 2 wonderful, quick, easy states with just a couple of things in each one. And they can be spread all over the place. They're going to perform better. They're going to be easy to bug check. They're going to be easy to tune and tweak as you move along in your game. And all the complexities right here. And when you think about that, this really isn't a whole lot of complexity. It's really pretty easy and pretty elegant. And you can tweak and tune this as you need for your game. So to wrap it all up, let's look at what we covered here. Global variables, really, really powerful. They allow you to store and communicate information all across your game. Very, very cool. This is how you keep track of stuff that, like scores and health and inventory and current game states and what's going on at various stages of your game. It allows you to communicate in a broad sense across the whole game, and that is so important. I cannot stress how important that is. Local variables, you really need them to do state control and functional things on individual objects, global variables, all across the game. So you can kind of think in those 2 tiers when you're setting them up. Sending events, equally powerful. It lets one FSM literally control another FSM. And that's really, really important because if you don't break up the intelligence and if you don't break up the complexity of your FSMs, you're just going to have some really crazy, complex, weird things that are going to have so many bugs and so much limited functionality in them. Breaking it up and spreading it around is really the key to it. And then send events back and forth to turn things on and off and activate whatever you need to activate to make your game fun. Finally, managers. Managers are the way you break that stuff up. You can make them on game objects. You can make them on invisible game objects. You can put them all over the place. Just know that this is the key to track all sorts of things. You can use managers to spawn waves, to set up levels and scenes when they're loading. What condition should it be in? Like if you've got a game where people are customizing, like they can buy things for their area or buy clothing for their character or whatever, you can have a manager just to control what's available. So it turns on and off when they load a certain scene or a certain level. You can have another manager that controls the storefront basically that allows them in game to do that kind of stuff. You can have another one for inventory for things they're carrying around. You could use them for weather, everything. Just think, how could I encapsulate the functionality of what I'm doing into one simple thing that allowed me to control it easily and then talk to it with events and global variables from elsewhere in your game.